Ja, hallo
Hello
und herzlich
and
willkommen bei einer
welcome
weiteren
to another ad
Aufsitzung vom
hoc session
Corona-Ausschuss
of
des
the
Professor
Corona
Professor
Committee.
Hecht.
We are visiting Professor
Professor Hecht
Hecht.
ist
Professor Hecht
pathologischer
is
Physiologe
a
und wir
physiologist,
wollen ihn heute
and
befragen
we
zu
want
Themen
to
des
talk
Mobilfunks.
about him
Professor Hecht,
about
ich möchte
mobile
gern von Ihnen wissen,
telecommunication.
was ist der
Professor Hecht, I would
Mobilfunk
like to
und
know
ist die
what is
Mobilfunkstrahlung gefährlich?
mobile radio
Ich muss
communication
erstmal
and is the
vorausschicken, dass ich
radiation
mit etwa seit 30
harmful?
Jahren
Well, I
in
have
der
to answer starting to say that
Gesundheitsschädigung
I have
Wirkung
been
der
working for 30 years
elektromagnetischen
with the
Funkwellen beschäftigt.
health
In
issues
dieser
of
Zeit haben
radio
mindestens bei mir
waves. During
über
this
1000
time, over
elektrohypersensible
1,000 radio
Menschen, die schwer
hypersensitive people
schwere Leiden
have
haben,
reported to me
wurzelarmig
severely
kontaktiert.
suffering,
Ich habe
and
ungefähr
I
100
have talked to, or
radargeschädigte
I have
Bundeswehrangehörige
examined about 100
gutachterlich und auch
soldiers
medizinisch
from
betreut.
the
Das war im
Federal
Jahr
Army
2008,
working with
2014.
radar radiation,
Und da bin ich zur
and that
Erkenntnis
led me to the
gekommen, dass
conclusion that
alle
all artificial
elektromagnetischen Funkwellen,
radiation,
die heute von Menschen hergestellt werden,
independent of the
in
frequency and
unabhängig von der
independent of the
Frequenz,
field
unabhängig
strength,
von der
but
Feldstärke,
depending on the
aber
time of
abhängig von der
exposure, is damaging
Einwirkungsdauer
to the human health,
Gesundheitsschäden
causing a
verschiedener Art
variety of
hervorrufen. Ich
symptoms,
würde sagen,
so many
Multimorbidität,
different
also es werden
symptoms that
viele
are triggered
Symptome
by radiation.
ausgelöst durch
And
diese
now
Krankheit.
I'd like to
So, jetzt
talk
möchte ich
about the
etwas, kurz
physics
etwas
of
zur
radiation, which has a
Die
certain
Strahlenphysik hat eine
classification.
bestimmte
First is
Einteilung. Das
ionizing
erste ist die
radiation. We're not going to
ionisierende
talk about this
Strahlung,
today, but
um
I'll
die geht
just
es
like
hier
to
zwar nicht, aber
introduce
ich
it
will sie
briefly.
erläutern.
It is
Die ionisierende
massive
Strahlung
with
ist sehr
high
massiv, mit
amounts
großer
of
Energie, kann
energy,
viele
able to
unserer
cause severe damage in our
verursachen, können
bodies. There is
Störungen
two
verursachen.
ways it
Aber es
takes
gibt hier
effect.
zwei
The
Wirkungen.
first is the
Die erste Wirkung ist
deterministic
die
effect,
deterministische,
brutally
die eben
affecting the
ganz
body
fatal
up
auf
to
den Körper wirkt. Sie kann
causing
tödlich
death,
wirken,
could
kann Krankheiten
cause
hervorrufen. Beim Röntgen haben wir das manchmal
severe
auch
damage to the skin, for
Schäden am
example. We have this in X-rays, and then there's the
hervorrufen.
stochastic
Und dann gibt es die
effect,
stochastische
which
Wirkung, die einfach
nuclear power plants and
Atomkraftwerken
accidents and nuclear power plants where this plays a role. This means small amounts of radiation that get trapped in the human body with a little radiation have the effect of a transmitter over long years, maybe even decades, where this leads to a visible symptom in the body. So it is difficult to set up this correlation, but this stochastic effect with that low level radiation is very tricky, because if we eat animals that have been exposed to radiation from the Chernobyl accident, that may even still now affect our health today. But now looking at the non-ionizing radiation, which is the field radiation, and this is again classified in two areas. One is a thermal effect. This is used in medicine as a thermotherapy, for example, where this is applied even today. And there is the athermal effect, and that means very low field strengths. There is processes that trigger lots of different symptoms in the body, and that is always the hinge point in the discussion with authorities and the technical independent researchers, saying there is an athermal radiation effect, and the authority, for example, the Federal Authority for Radiation Protection, says this is only a background noise without any effect on the human body. And this is why there is a lot of discussion going on, but the ignoring of the athermal effect is very unscientific, because since the 1980s there are so many proofs of this thermal effect having an effect on the body is proven. Since 1932, the Dr. German Friedhagel for the first time described the radio wave sickness, and in his work he found out that people who worked close to radio transmitters had the following symptoms: strong weakness during the day, burnout, and little sleep, bad sleep during the night, headache, getting worse and worse until they become unbearable, inclination to depression or overexcitement and anxiousness. And he also shows that there is a high receptibility for immune diseases, and he described at the time that by heat alone these symptoms cannot be explained. By affecting the central nervous system, that is the brain of the human being, seems to reduce the ability of the body to fight back this type of diseases. This was already published in 1932, and since then lots of papers have been published in this respect. First, I'd like to show you this picture here. If we have a transmitter, that could be a cell phone, for example, the radiation waves hit our brain. So we have the EEG here, the frequencies of the brain, and they synchronize with the brain waves and disturb the brain functions. And the brain, of course, controls all life processes, including the genes in the body, and on that basis, the brain is the most sensitive organ and the most important organ that we have to keep our eye on if we look at the athermal effect of radiation. If we look at the city, it is heavily loaded with radiation. There is wireless LAN, there's smartphones, there's Tetra, there's detect phones, radar, and there is a continuous radiation in any city, straining the people, and radiation disease can be is multimorbid. It has many different symptoms, and in this case the symptoms, they're not all present in everyone. Depending on the individualities, they change. But what can happen? Stress, oxidative stress, and I'll talk about that later. Immune deficits, increased receptibility for infects, headaches, sleeping trouble, fatigue, burnout syndromes, hypersensitivity, which is factually electric stress, people who move close to computers or any electric devices, transmitters, they get skin effects, they get headaches, and it is unbearable for them to bear these symptoms. Accelerated breathing frequency, neurodermatic diseases, heart rhythm problems, problem of the digestive system, infertility, which is quite widespread. I've mentioned trouble sleeping, leukemics, and tremors, and muscle tensions. These are the most important or the most prominent symptoms that are observed. I've mentioned two, which is radiation disease, or the sickness caused by electromagnetic radiation, and the electrohypersensitivity. The radiation disease only breaks out after longer exposure. Hypersensitivity is more frequent in people, either if they have a predisposition or they have been exposed for a long time as well. And these electro-hypersensitive people are very sorrowful. They can't use their sleeping rooms because all the electricity in their rooms hurts the families. They have to go down to the cellar to sleep because there they would be blocked off. Mr. Weiner only sleeps in the forest, and there is some holes in the radiation carpet where they still can move to. And now we have to see these symptoms, and it does happen that these radiation diseases, if they get radiation as a therapy, they may get worse, and they also may get radiosensitive. We know this, we have observed this. The electromagnetic field that they can disturb the wireless LAN is what the telecom has given in their manual to their speedport routers, which says the integrated antennas of the speedport send and receive radio signals to provide your wireless LAN. Avoid setting up the speedport close to sleeping rooms and rooms where you spend lots of time in order to reduce the load emitted from electromagnetic fields. So you have to read the small prints if you get this, and actually that tells you a very long story short. There is one more thing to add. Actually, for a long time, it is known that these electromagnetic fields emit radiation, and in the years 1957 to 74 in the US, there was 11 conferences with lots of discussion if there is an athermal effect or not. And one of these, on the 5th convention, which was hosted in 1957, the people who had proven the athermal effects became the majority under the lead of a military doctor, Dr. Alan Fry, who led lots of experiments and examinations in this field. And he did experiments with rats who got so badly hurt by the experiments that he warned everybody to enter these radio waves. And the major findings of Alan Fry were that first, radio waves can be made audible. There are villages where people live that can hear the noise of them. That is in connection with 5G. Apart from that, the permanent exposure to very low radiation opens the blood-brain barrier, which blocks poisons away from the brain. And if this is open, particulate matter, for example, poisons, may enter the brain. So this is not only the radiation itself that affects the brain, but possible poisonous substances as well. And the finding, the observation was that in the electromagnetic radiation, it's not like in chemistry that there is a dependency on the doses, large doses, large effect, small doses, small effect. The inverse is true. Small effects, now that's low field strengths have strong effects, and there is numerous observations showing this. In 1968, on one of these conferences, it was decided that a commission may be appointed, the Office for Telecommunication, that they prepare a governmental report to control electromagnetic environmental pollution. And this governmental report was published in 1971, and amongst others, it says the consequences of an underestimation of the biological damage caused by long exposure to radiation, also at lowest possible radiation strength, may have catastrophic, disastrous consequences for the general health of the general population. That is something to be taken very seriously, but unfortunately the military and the industry blocked the implementation of the consequences of this report, and all research was blocked and slowed down. I can say that until 1970 on the US side there was so much proof and observations, thousands of scientific papers proving that this athermal effect of lowest exposition field strength will cause substantial health problems. Another point was that in 1996, at the time, I founded a private institute with my colleague Dr. Balzer, and we were invited by the Federal Office for Telecommunication. It's an agency today. We have been appointed to examine the biologic effect of electromagnetic fields on human beings. That was the order we were appointed to. We came up with a 120-page report to do that within a year. So we came up with over 800 scientific papers on this area, proving that lowest intensity fields after long-term exposure cause a biological damage. And this report was immediately locked away in the dryers, and it was even denied that we have had such a report, even if only if I gave the order number to the respective people. This report was dug up later on. This was one of the reasons why in the Soviet Union the limit value was tenfold by the factor 1,000 lower than in Germany. At the point it was 0.01 milliwatt per square meter, and in Europe it is 10.0 milliwatt per square meter that are allowed per square centimeter. That is a massive difference of magnitudes, and here this means that occupational safety examination done by Professor Korten, an occupational physician who did work in this field, speaking out that in the Soviet Union the athermal effect of these radiation is looked at in great deep detail, and there was an annual examination of the people which looked like this. Somebody who was hired healthy was checked up very extendedly, EEG, EKG, pre-examinations and so on an annual base, genetic inspection, examination, memory testing, and when they got sick, they were taken out and either treated or they got a different job. And Professor Cottom worked 10 years with over 1,000 people, monitoring them this way. And it came out that the electromagnetic fields, these very weak electromagnetic fields, work like a stressor. That means stress has alarm reaction, triggers alarm reactions in the body, and then the fatigue. And based on these examinations, we could prove that we have the following chart. In the first year, there was only a slight increase in the levels. That was more like a positive stress. And then over the next period, there was a deflation, nothing happened. And in the third year, usually after the fifth year, the fatigue set in. That means the symptoms set in. And then the exams went over 10 years. And so during this monitoring period, it was very clear when the individuals fell sick, some after 3 years, some after 5, some only after 10 years. So the effect is very different. And now I have to add that in Germany and US, in Europe in general, most of the examines were stopped after. Most of the monitoring periods were only 30 days. Most of them only 2 years without any findings, which is very clear because the alteration starts this way, as we see here. So these results on the stress reaction are quite visible. And when we presented that, the American scientists, that was around the year 2000, were devastated and say we only check and monitor for 2 years and can't find anything. So the minimum monitoring period should be 5 years, and so only the long-term effect can be established this way. Any monitoring which is shorter than 5 years, you can chuck them out in the rubbish straight away. They have no value. But this is the studies that are the traditional studies that the Federal Agency for Radiation Protection applies as the basis for their decisions. And now I would like to add the following. I was also asked in 2008 to work with military people from the German military. That was over 17 years where I did this, and in the 60s and 70s the soldiers had no occupational safety in their work, and usually they had 10 to 12 years, most of them volunteers, so enthusiastic people. And it turned out that they had no occupational safety and they were exposed to radiation. And the following was found out with the Association for Radiation Victims. They told us that in 2016, 3,800 sick or died people were found, and only 600 were recognized as victims of radiation exposure. one of the persons of the victims who I work with published this book, Thanks of Your Country, and he described his situation, his own situation, and that of two comrades who also suffered from radiation disease, that is radar radiation here. And on the back side of the book he has the following text to understand his desperation. He says, you want a biological solution, the gentleman from the army, but not without being my experiences being shared in public in a book. We have to read this, what game they are playing with us, a very concerning situation. If over years it is sustainably tried to push things under the rug in the service for your country. My country is the Federal Republic of Germany, and it's good to protect it, but not on the cost of lives. And this book here is very well readable. A very young person having leukemia, and now two comrades who died, what he suffered due to his service in the Federal Army, including 3,000 of its comrades. I have attended him, I have worked with him, I have accompanied him, and in many of the meetings we were treated very badly. I was there with two further doctors, and in the end, finally, we found judges who listened to our arguments, and after 23 years of protest and fighting, he got his compensation. One out of many, and most of them didn't get any compensation at all. And one more thing that we do have to observe is that the radiation are a major risk, especially for our children. Our children, in our children's body, the physical development has not completely completed. It takes until the age of 16 to 20 for the physical development of the child's body to fully develop, and that is why the effect of radiation is 10 times as high on a child's body than it is on adults. And this is why Professor Teuker-Thom looked into this in detail, working a lot with children, stating that it should only be allowed for 16 years old, like taking a license, a car driver's license. Then that should be the minimum age for the use of cell phones to protect them. But now wireless LAN, Wi-Fi is used in schools, and the children are exposed to this at all times. There's lots of research showing that the children have to be protected against this. And there is another observation to be made, which I'd like to highlight on, which is oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is a symptom that is triggered by ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. I have to explain this. Usually we have an oxidative system in our bodies. That means the oxygen is ionized so that it can be picked up by the cells, and to control this we have antioxidants in our bodies, and these two have to be balanced. But by the ionizing radiation as well as the non-ionizing radiation, the thermic weak field radiation disturb this balance, and then we have an excess of free radicals, and that is called oxidative stress. And this is observable by many scientific papers, at least 200-300. This is only an excerpt list where this has been proven. And this oxidative stress is the seventh function that leads to burnout syndrome, accelerates aging, supports immune diseases, arteriosclerosis, immune weaknesses, melanoma, receptibility to viruses, respiratory diseases, damages the cells, and causes stress at all levels, right down to the mitochondria, and that leads to respective degenerative processes in the nervous system like dementia. And so these are three factors that play a role here, which is the radiation and its effect in general, hypersensitivity to electromagnetic radiation, and we have the opening of the blood-brain vessel barrier, and the oxidative stress, which has increased notably over the past years, and this has been ignored by all authorities systematically in a very responsible way, in my point of view. And now I'd like to come to Corona. We work safety officers live of our competency, and in 2020 we have written an open letter to the Federal Chancellor, the different federal ministers, and in this letter we pointed out that in the corona infection we also observe the damages caused by electromagnetic radiation, listing them as I had listed them before, and we pointed out that this general medical knowledge to trigger an infection, we need two factors: the condition of the host, the person, and the virus or the bacteria. And if the condition of the person is excellent, the virus cannot have any effect on the person's health. This is a well-known fact from medical history. This has been known for at least 120 years. In Germany, there was a row between Robert Koch and the Munich professor Max von Pettenkofer, and also between Virchow and Koch. Both of them said we have to tidy up our environment. At the time it was sewage systems. Koch said it's not all going to help, it's all the bacteria. And on that side, Max von Pettenkofer in 1892 did an experiment in his auditorium. He took a tube, putting 1 milliliter of colibacteria, drank it, and he didn't get sick. So that is why first line, keeping the health in shape is what we need to do, but we don't have any healthy people anymore. We only have recovered and vaccinated people. And so we have to set up our health system. That is crucial for any kind of infection. The same experiment was done by Claude Bernard in France, who looked at the inner medicine, saying that the microbe is nothing, the milieu is everything. He discussed it with Pasteur, and today we have the power of the virologists and the people who say we have to get healthy, strengthen our health system, and the doctors can't say anything and do not say anything. They are called querulous and are censored, and the lockdown is the most negative thing for the immune system that we could have possibly done. It is proven that the lack of social interaction is as harmful as anything. If we lock the children in, you make them sick, and then they are receptive to infects, and then they get more and more sick. So this is that kind of bridge. We have to consider the environmental factors, that is the electrosmog. And the second point was that in 2018 there was a special session of the federal accounting, the European Accounting Government Office, and they found that particulate fine dust and the particulate matter is harmful, and all the limit values are trespassed, and wherever that happens, it is said that 400,000 people die of the fine particulate matter due to the environmental effects, and these are early deaths, untimely deaths, and there was heart diseases, lung diseases, all of this was published in 2018. All of this is non-existent today in our medicine, so that all of a sudden there is a completely new approach. What used to be particulate fine dust, now that is all a virus, and that stunned me, and I have asked that question and I don't get any answer, and if I get answers I am called a conspirationalist. That is what I wanted to make as a point here. Can I ask you another question? The point is that during the lockdown, the children were locked at home and again subjected to the Wi-Fi at home and the digital world. They spent much more time in front of the computer and the iPads, so that is even more harmful, and that may be a side effect of the lockdown, so to say. Yes, Rubicon published this article I wrote. Factually, that is a consequence of the health. I found 10 criteria that were found in the lockdowns. First of all, it was the limitation of the lockdown to a room, little effect, little connection with nature, and the lack of movement, and the computers. So with the computers, we are more and more subject to radiation. There is 10 factors. I have a list. I can send that list to you if you want to. That the lockdown causes new diseases and by no means is a prevention against any disease. Okay, thank you. I would be interested to find out how these problems have been obscured from the public. Well, that's a very long story, and in the last months I have exchanged some letters with the president of the Federal Agency for Radiation Protection, and I offered to ensure the health of the people, to work in radiation protection and protection against electromagnetic radiation, and start a discussion on this. And this letter was just filed away, and a physician gave me the answer saying that all what I say is wrong. For example, hypersensitivity is just imagination because there is no research done, and the respective research has shown this. And in response, I answered, of course, and pointed out that this is not right, but I didn't get any additional answer on that response. One thing is that I took up the work of 2 Swiss scientists on oxidative stress, and the Swiss government paid for them, and these researchers have shown that radiation exposure over a long time has an effect on the oxidative stress that I have mentioned, and that it even causes it. And I sent this in and says there's good and bad oxidative stress, and so the point was that they didn't want to get into discussion. I wanted to do a convention on this, with independent people from the industry, and then discuss this like the Americans did, as I quoted before, from the 57 to 74. But there was no response at all to this. But just to illustrate the consequences, this is a newspaper article, brain tumors for cell phones are rehabilitated. That is very irresponsible to publish this kind of article. In 2005, Vatican was ruled by a Italian court because the children in the vicinity of the Vatican caught leukemia. And there was epidemiologic work and studies done in children, in adults, animal experiments. So there's lots of scientific facts that are present, and the press or whoever it may be simply say it's harmless, nothing happens. This is mainly in the US. Another study funded by the government, finding that NTP that proved that radiation can cause cancer or does cause cancer, but that was simply ignored. The Italian courts have registered this as a professional disease. They have proven this as a professional disease caused by radio emissions, and it is very responsible by this newspaper, a doctor's newspaper even, publishing this. However, I have to say that the doctors are quite confused if we say it's no problem. If we put the limit, we have the limit values, but the limit values are misleading. If we set up the limit values that they apply for children and elderly, I did expertises on this, and we looked at the effects on children in kindergartens, for elderly in care homes, we decided what radiation exposure they should have as limit values, and this is what we should demand from the Federal Agency for Radiation Protection, that they implement this, but nothing in this respect is done. The limit value is set by the federal government. Well, may I ask, there is an organization that should inspect this. Well, that is the consulting body. It's a club, so to say, with the esteemed technical scientists who think they can set the limit values wherever thinkable, and they only think physically. They have a specific absorption rate which they introduced in the end of last century, and then they measured at a plastic model of a head with conductible liquid, and they exposed that to radiation, and if that was heated up over a certain time, that was the criteria. And it was asked, one of the experts in that club was asked for the research that they had done. There was no research done, so it means that is a limit value which is just a rule of thumb basically, and that is applied worldwide, and they did it in such a way that the WHO affects it, and the WHO also represents the opinion that there is no hypersensitive people, but that this is just an imagination of the people, and that is also published respectively in respective magazines, but however, all reporting doesn't help. Professor Hecht, one has to have the impression that private people have far too much power to take over or rule into the authorities. That's my impression. Do you share that impression? Yes, we've seen that in the corona. The pharma industry had the power, and as long as I have been working in this field, we are attacked, and they have so much power, and they are not depowered. The industry is stronger than the independent scientists are. It's as simple as that. We have had a very short interview, I think 20 years ago, with the former Health Minister Seehofer, where he clearly told a journalist that without the pharma lobby, nothing will be possible in the health ministry. But that doesn't seem to limit to health at this point in time, but the lobby of the corporate groups obviously plays a role in all governed bodies. Yes, I think that's exactly true. And just to give you that as an answer, I am an enemy of medical drugs. About 50 years in my scientific work, I have done research on medical drugs, and I came to the conclusion that I can't swear the oath of the doctors, because every medical drug causes other diseases, and it is why I made it my own obligation to simply live a healthy life, only using natural medicines, and I want to get 100 years old with that, and I have 2 years to go, and I think I will manage. And one more thing I'd like to say is that due to the mask in July 2020, I met someone at a bus stop, and somebody pushed me over, and I broke my neck, and the surgeon gave me little hope. But by a natural life that I live, I was able to save my life. And the doctors who looked at me came in and say, "You don't take any medical drugs?" "No, what? You're a bit crazy. How can you be healthy as you are?" All the exams were normal. At the time, I was 96 or 97, really, and that is possible. And Eugen Roth had a saying, "Health and nature will leave the doctor without pay." So that is what is keeping us up here. Well, just as an anecdote, you can do without medical drugs. There is enough medicine provided by nature, and I only refer to that. And I founded the sleep laboratory in the Charité. I didn't have any drugs. I took magnesium salt. That is an ancient Greek drug. We have magnesium hydrochloride as a spray, and for example, the pain that I had when I broke my neck bones, I only calmed that with that magnesium spray. And first day they gave me drugs, and when I saw the side effects, I stopped that and only used that to condemn my pain. That is what we have to teach the people. It is about real natural medicine, which has been around for millions of years, and we don't need any pharmaceuticals. I would like to come back to the radiation. I would be interested, this 5G. What is the difference between 5G and other radiation? Yes, I would like to take you through a little advertising brochure from a company from Switzerland, which has described this. These are the radiation waves from the top, and now the direction is only from the bottom. So it doesn't go this way, but it goes up from this side. And that is one thing. And the big thing is this. When it came from the top, we've only had one area. Now we have 64 radiation beams. Before it was only one, and the yellow one is 60, and the other is 120 volts per square meters, and they radiate precisely onto the buildings. This is an image as it works, and it is built up in distances of 150 meters to create a network which has not got any holes. That is going to be hell for electromagnetic hypersensitive people. They will have no escape from all of that radiation. So I'll hand this over to you. This is how it is set up, because it's a very good comparison. Is that frequency, is that fundamentally different? Is that to penetrate more deeply or less? We have different frequencies, but let me repeat, any technical frequency is not biological, and our frequency range in the body, we have quite a few, is rough frequencies. They have a variability of amplitudes and frequencies. They're not constant. The artificial frequencies are very, very precise. physically precise, and that is what interferes with the frequencies in our bodies. Whatever frequencies there are, be it 5 gigahertz, why should it be faster? Why do we need faster computers for? I have reports from Korea said we haven't won anything but more damage. I have also heard this from the people who sell mobile phones. Corbin Ravenstein wanted to buy a new phone, and he wanted one that does not do 5G, and he was told that it was good because it is no good or no use anyway, this 5G. What does the 5G do then? Well, I've listed all the symptoms, and now you have no escape. You are under permanent radiation, so these symptoms are going to be more and more symptoms like sleeplessness and so on, including cancer, all of these symptoms that I've listed, and that they need such high power, so much volt, is that there may be a thermal effect added to this, but I can't be clear on this. This is a hypothesis still that is expectable, however, and surely I can say that the electro-hypersensitive people who are only imaginary, for them it will be pure hell. And I have had a report that meteorologists say that by that 5G network, the weather observation is that it may affect the weather even. And I got information from the media lately that in the US, air traffic is obstructed by 5G, and that this is kind of reduced, but you don't hear too much from the mainstream media anyway. But as far as my findings go, and what we see here, what else was described is that this is a high risk factor for the human health. Is there any positive aspect in 5G, or is it only to create damage? It only creates problems in the health. You can hardly evade it if you are exposed to this kind of radiation. It goes through the windows, into the buildings, through the walls. So people are going to react differently for this. Some can even put up with it, but after a certain time, it is going to have an effect. And is that in operation in Germany everywhere? I don't know. I'm not enough of a technician to know that. It depends on the information, but one thing has been observed also by a European initiative of citizens, that in the tailwater of Corona, the digitization 5G has strongly developed without any headwind, and that we are in a phase now which has to be taken very, very seriously with respect to the human health. What considerations are there concerning, for example, the satellites Elon Musk has launched? Well, that is madness by magnitude. I don't know, he wants to build up a network and even close the last holes with his network. Professor Furstenberg has told me that these satellites, some of them are up. He wants to have thousands of them up, and I can't understand it, what that is supposed to do. It may be a technical issue that each loophole in the network is to be closed, but I'm not too much into that topic. I can't understand what that is all about. It is damaging to the health, but what Elon Musk says, well, we say Elon Musk doesn't listen to it. We have had a group of scientists writing a letter to him in person, warning him, but there was no response. And this 5G, can that precisely target a person? Well, it is radiation in general. It is emitted by the transmitters, and you can switch your cell phone on everywhere. And if the cell phone receives the radio waves, it is on, and you get it as well. It's like passive smoking. If somebody smokes next to you, you smoke as well. And the same applies if somebody has a phone on and you are next to them. You are subjected to 5G radiation. Can we invent a device which protects you against that radiation? Well, that is a question I may come back to later. There is quite a few things that I test on myself. Maybe I could refer to this here. We have the magnetic field therapy developed by Professor Ludwig, and he established a number of companies to work with that. 64 different frequencies. There is the geomagnetic field, which is about 10 to 8 hertz, and all of the elements which are present in the surface of our Earth radiate frequencies. These have been all joined up. The Chinese have done some work here 1,000 years ago. Professor Ludwig took this over, and if you get onto this mat which he developed for 20 minutes a day, the damage of the day can be recovered. At least with many people, there are many practitioners who do this. I have got one of these magnetic wave mats here, and I use it. It has good therapeutical worth. That would be something. And there is one more thing that I would like to show here. I also work with for over 20 years, I've been working with a silicate, which is zeolite. In Chernobyl, 500,000 tons of zeolite were brought there in order to bind the radionuclides, and this zeolite binds poisons and radionuclides, and it is pulverized, and it can be eaten orally. It has antibacterial effects as well, and that's mainly silicium dioxide and a type of acid. I have a book published on this explaining exactly this. I am using this daily for 20 years, and I have had TV shows on this, and there is lots of presentations on this. This zeolite can have a protective effect, and so if you want to do research on this, you are usually laughed at. But there is many people, for example, a German person living in London who attends electrosensitive people. I recommended for her to give them zeolite, and she had people who couldn't take the subway, and they can do so now. So patients who live close to radiation emitters, radio emitters, could bear the radiation. And so that is an alternative, but you have to take care that you only use it as a medicine product. There's many companies who sell it cheaply, and that is rubbish. I found this on Amazon. There's 5 companies that sell this under my name. I never knew the companies, neither was it anything to do with me, but Silith is one substance that is very helpful in this respect. And there is a Dr. Shostek from Switzerland who worked with Silith for a long time and still does so. And he works with Chinese medicine. And in all 4 corners of his room, he put up tubes with Sirlite, and with his methods, he showed that the room is clean of any radiation, and this is why I have a respective stone in all 4 corners of my room. So neither my wife nor me have any observations that could be related to electromagnetic smog. We walk out in the forest 2 hours every day. I walk 6 kilometers every day, so we are very fit physically. And also the silicium dioxide has a trigger function. It is a salt called the salt of eternal youth. Look at my face, look at my hair. It is all smooth, so it is worth taking it and live on it. So that is one opportunity, one possibility that I do see. I've tried to do some research on what, however, I didn't do that. I couldn't do that. It is individual cases only that people who could protect themselves. If you want to protect against radiation, then it should also protect against non-ionizing radiation, so that should be helpful. I have answered one of the questions, I think, and so there is no direct protection. There is an attempt in South America to build a kind of Faraday cage, but that's a bit that makes life a bit difficult because I can't get out of it, and that makes life a bit hard. So that is no real protection, and well, it's always you always have to trade it off for something, and there is no sufficient scientific papers on this. However, that's my experience, which I can share. I can tell you it helps. It helped in Chernobyl, so probably it'll help now as well. Incredible. It shows that you have to do completely different studies than what is done today and nowadays. Well, I've written a couple of books on this, and of course in the beginning I was attacked strongly. Well, I would be interested if it is possible to target individuals by radiation, if there is some respective substances, chips, nanobots, whatever you may imagine in their bodies. Well, that is standards. 2 years ago, there was a media hype on a neural link with the brain being susceptible to external effects. I have written a little brochure on this and called The Thoughts Are Free, and I analyzed this because in '68 I was on a World Physiologists Conference, and there was a physiologist doing experiments with a herd of monkeys, and they had a boss. If the boss got angry, they bit his hand and bit the hands of the weaker ones and hit them and shouted. And now the scientist put in an interface, a brain interface, a receptor in the monkey's brain, and put a transmitter which could be operated by a lever. And as soon as the herd of monkeys was was trained, as soon as the lead monkey started to get angry, one of the monkeys pulled the trigger, and that shut the lead monkey down. So we know this has been around since the 1960s or even earlier, that this is possible and this can be done. Now with the interface, this has been done respectively. In the 70s, they wrote a book that the spirit can be affected with physical factors, and this is the competence initiative on which I wrote. But if you believe that is utopia, I have this article here from a Berlin newspaper where a biotechnician from Vienna gave an interview saying that without chip, you are a second-grade person. That was published in June. And I wrote a counter-article to that in the Berlin newspaper explaining the inhumaneness of this. So all of this is ongoing and worse still. This came up a little while ago. Neurograins listen to the brain. So microchips are the interface of the future. This describes that nanoparticles can be introduced into the body, and these nanoparticles can be spread around the body. And another information that came out these days only, IBM presents 2 nanometer chips. So they were 7 nanometers before. 7 nanometers is described. They can they can carry 1 million of transistors, and so 7 is smaller than a salt of grain, and of course that's easy to put into an injection and inject that into people. All of this is existing, and it is said even that people who are paralyzed could be helped with that. I've read this and thought, well, it is said that with that chip and with the microchip, they want to serve the health of the people. People who are paralyzed can be helped, but there is completely different information available. Handelsblatt, another German newspaper, published this 2 years ago, saying that money notes could be used that way. A biotechnician, a person called Schmidt, said that without a chip implemented, we would be people of second class. And now the point is to connect the people to the computer systems. And this is the post-humanism which is approaching now. And I've written this in the article of the Berlin newspaper. And Armin Krohn is also a person looking into the consequences of technology in the federal parliament. And it's a book that you need to read to understand what is coming up. The first sentence is, it is no good what's coming up. And he says that today everybody is enthusiastic about technology. Everybody wants digitization. People want to get a chip implemented or implanted, and the consequences, which are constant control, and that makes it possible to have sickening effects and lots of other things. So you cease to be a human being. You're computer controlled, and some people have started to implant these interfaces into human beings, and they have developed it. And they said that a patient told them, I don't know, was it me or the computer who controls my interface? So this is something that I would like to show you again here. So it is a self-learning system, and it is independent, and that can control the brain. So it works from the cell phone. The radiation goes here, and from here it goes to the brain and back to the cell phone. So these interfaces are bidirectional, and it's a new type of computer. It's a robot, really, that controls the brain. Is there no considerations whether that is ethical? Well, there are people who say it is ethical, but is not very consistent. Also, people who say it's unethical are not very consistent. This is the Neuralink. They were very enthusiastic about this. I do fear that there is lots of things like these controlled by the industries. Yesterday night, I was in a discussion with American scientists and lawyers, and I do think that we have no other opportunity than separating from this development. If they want to, can do it, but we will not go along. We need a new health system, we need a new legal system, new society, a new education. That's going to be attractive, but that will have nothing to do with computers. Yes, quite rightly so. That is my conviction as well. Back to nature. We have to go back, and I have explained this in a number of articles. We have to separate from the computers. There is surveys that managers without computers got sick after a week. They are addicted to it. Even the German Doctors magazine warns against addiction to the internet, and by now there is a severe risk of addiction to computers, and getting out of that is difficult. So I have written a number of articles on this, that one should try to get back to nature, and that is the most important and best thing to do. But you have to set up your own group for that. We have to separate, yes. So there is a book that was published in 96 by Nevyatov, a German futurologist, and he he talked about the six-Kontrayev cycle. Kontrayev was a Russian economist who said that there are economic cycles. First was the trains and the cars, and now it's information. And he says 200 years technology have ruined the physical health of the people and ecology, and now we have to get into an age in which all of this is going to be repaired. He called it psychosocial health system. That is the center of it, and for me that would be the era that we need to start now. I tried to do this in a couple of ways. I have published a Nature on a magazine on this, but it is difficult to prosper these new ideas. I've published it anyway in a number of different articles, but there was no reaction so far. So it's this sixth cycle. Psychosocial health is what we need. It is all set up. We don't need a computer for that. Economy can grow by taking ecology into the game, an interplay of ecology and human beings. It's not an interplay of technology and human beings anymore. That is what we have to go for. Professor Hecht, yesterday in the Corona meeting, we had the former Prime Minister of Newfoundland, Canada and Labrador. He told us, he's 78 years old, he told us that he comes from a family where we had true values. My grandfather was a fisherman. We were connected to nature. I know where my origins are, my roots are, and he is the only popular politician in Canada who fights back these corona madnesses, and he tells me that more and more people are of his opinion that this artificial effect on the human being is rejected. We see what the effect is, namely massive health damages. Yes, we do have a group of doctors who are of that same opinion. I grew up in the countryside as well. My father was a farmer, my grandfather was a farmer, so I know what all this is up to, and I'm very connected to nature even today, and this is why I live around the forest here, and despite my handicap, I walk 2 hours, that I experience the nature anew every day. We have a lake here, close to here. When I go there, I see the sun rising in the east, like in the seaside. So you have to bring the people back to nature, but that should be a school course. But here we have the school curricula teaching by computer. People want to get rid of the human teacher. This posthumanism is what I fight back. Again, in the Berlin newspaper, I wrote against this, and I wrote my acquaintances acknowledge this and know this, but it doesn't seem to pick up in the general population. I am just pulled down. Yes, we have all of this, but Professor Hecht, you are not alone. We think the same way you think. The Canadian politician, there is many people, I think 20-30% of the people do think the way we do think. And it moves in the right direction. Yeah, we have to get them together in some kind of way. At the time, we had a big event in Berlin where Kennedy spoke. That was all people like this all together, but what that was, of course, split up and smashed down by conspiration theories, whether ever they wanted to storm the Reichstag, I don't know, but that was the biggest demonstration, the biggest rally Berlin has ever seen, and all of that has been taken down and taken apart. We were there as well. I was there. I got to know Mr. Kennedy. He spoke just before me, and then we have this crazy story of that storm on the Reichstag. We know it was staged to distract it. Yes, I was to speak there, and I had fallen over, and I was in therapy, and I couldn't make my speech there. We would have met at the time then. Okay, I just wanted to show you one more thing. This is a German patent of thought transmission, and that is something I have mentioned in my articles. So, and there is lots of patents this way in the US on thought transmission. After the first examinations were done in Spain with the bulls, the same experiments as with the monkeys were done with bulls, and with the same effect. So this needs a chip. Is there a possibility now that in the brain we have some other particles that could collect there? That is, what do you think? Would it be possible that, so why do you do this at all? Well, you do that, why do you produce these small chips then? Well, in order to implement them into the people. So that should be prohibited. It's no problem at all. And of course, that as it is not published what substances are in the vaccines, of course it is an easy thought to put this in, and companies like Pfizer's, if they have been if they only need to show what's inside us in 50 years, of course that causes some irregularities. But as soon as you start asking questions, you get into problems. So the article by Professor Martin Schmidt, without brain chip, you're a person second class. That is far, far down the road already. Anyway, we have to detach from this. We have to build up our own world. Is it imaginable that inside the body certain matter, plant matter, bacteria, animal substances that can be put in, can be used that way? We have, if we radiate heat, we radiate infrared radiation as well. And there was Professor Nickel working on this in 56, and he looked at the infrared radiation of human bodies, and it wasn't carried on. Today we have maps of the body emitting high and low level of infrared radiation, and this is what you can make use of. So Professor Femina has developed a bed sheet, woven quartz, silicium dioxide, and mixed with cotton and things like that. And the infrared radiation is used, and by that way it reflects. The infrared radiation is hits the silicium, and then that reflects back, and that calms down the parasympathetic nerve system. That is produced already, and these are things that you can do. And of course, you can use that in other ways if you want to, of course.
Einmal die Kamera.
So, da war das weg, das haben wir noch Bilder. Wir hatten das war jetzt die 5. nicht?
Genau, ich hatte.
Well,
Das waren die natürlich. Dann
I have another question. Are there nanostructures that can develop to a network with an external trigger? Well, I can say that the function of the body has to be observed and not so much the structures. And here we have to find that we are electrical beings, so to say. We can measure that with EEGs, EKGs, the respective medical systems. We have the EEG here. That is possible to measure it. And the fact is that if our electricity works properly, we are fit, we are healthy, that can be registered in these electromagnetic examinations. As soon as we get sick, and that can be seen, our electricity, which is our energy, is disturbed. And the heart doesn't work properly, the brain doesn't work properly, the muscles don't work, the skin. If we're dead, we have no electricity left. The clinical death is determined by the EEG measuring electricity in the body, and this is why electricity plays the main role in our bodies. And of course, that is the approach for the electromagnetic waves. That is the EEG that affect this. In Tübingen, there is a research project, a school, where they put EEG measuring systems on the pupil and wanted to analyze the attention of the person. That means reflected by the EEG on a screen, and the teacher could see who is following the class with attention and who's not, and so she can react immediately, say, you are not attending class. That is a live research project, and that is funded by the Federal Ministry of Health. So that way you can simply normalize the students. The thinking processes are completely eliminated, and a professor which I know and I esteem very much said that the thinking is the highest asset of the person. We have to teach our children how to think, and so it's all possible, it can all be done, but there is something else also in this context, and that takes me back to silicium dioxide, which is in the genes. There are crystals, and crystals found in the genes are of that matter, silicium dioxide. And if you follow the creation there is a sound of life, which is a silicate. Genesis tells that man was formed from clay, which is exactly that material. And there is an American professor who has shown that as soon as the radiation waves hit the DNA, they work as an individual transmitter. So that was in certain waves that can be located, first published in 1941, and so that shows it is possible by radiation go right into the brain, into the DNA of the people, and that turns it into transmitters. That is another pathologic observation. And one thing that I have to add, the point is very clear that our cells have structured liquids, it's cordial liquids, that is a certain agency. We have suspensions, colloidate, and solutions. Colloidates is the modules in a certain level of tension. All the liquids in the body are set by that, and they are not subject to gravity. If we hadn't this, the blood wouldn't flow back up to our heart. That can only done by cordial liquids, which are electrically controlled inside the body, and this is it's electric as well. And as it is electric, any kind of radiation, any kind of frequency can affect this. Whatever field strength you may have, in particular weak field strengths, because this is the way our brain controls the body, and this is why electricity, external electricity, is a major harm to the health of our body. Oh, that is very illustrative. So there was one more thing. This is something that I wanted to show you. This is the bed with the reflecting infrared reflecting function. Let me see, what else have we got? We could go to the next question. That was, is there nanostructures that can be connected to a network triggered by an external source? Would that be possible? Is what's necessary? Temperature, flowing, volume flow? Well, I have to turn to my holistic view of the frequencies. It has been shown by Professor Dr. Klitzing, who is someone who is a close relative and friend to me. He has shown that we have a 10 Hertz pulsing in the system. If these are dashed frequencies, it is quite harmless, but if it's pulsing frequencies, it does more harm. And he did some observations in electrosensitive people. These 10 Hertz frequencies are shown here in the myogram. This is electrocardiogram. So you see that here in the myogram. And if the wireless, the Wi-Fi is on, and if it is off, it is still there, and this is a conditioning. So it means it is a memory Just like we have a pain memory, you know, if you have phantom pain with an amputation of a lost limb, if you feel the pain, if it was lost under great pain, that pain still remains in the memory. And the same way, 10 hertz Wi-Fi memory is triggered. That means there is a conditioning of these effects, and that is something. The conditioning is something of psychologists may have heard of. That is not observed at all, technology-wise. We have that in pain therapy, but it's the old Pavlov reflex. If you repeat things often enough, it is coined into the brain and builds a memory. That can be positive, that can be habits, and negative as well. And that works the same way as well. Why is 10 hertz so important? Is it necessary? The producing effects, negative effects, it should be taken out immediately. So, just imagine children get this, and then it is a strong effect. Even if they don't sit on the computer, if they are in the forest, they still have that stress level out of the memory. And what time does it take to forget it, so to say? Well, removing it, you can hardly remove a pain memory. Of course, you can do it. Well, the more manifest it is, the more difficult it is. It can be deleted in certain situations, but if you're sensitive, and if children have been sitting in front of the computer for a year, it's very, very difficult to remove it. So maybe you can delete it, just like deleting, it's as difficult as deleting the pain memory. You just think of taking drugs to turn off that quickly. If it is so manifest, and I think it is very manifest in very many people, if you stay a year in front of the computer and you even have maybe connection to a computer tower, transmission tower, if it's not so long, you may be able to delete it over time. But if you are conditioned that way and it is manifest enough, it is very, very difficult to remove it. We have discussed this many times, and there have been examples given that it is quite gruesome, and still it is ignored, and people are fought back and called as not serious and whatever, if they come up with this kind of idea. So it's all here in my writings, which I have published. I can give them to you, provide them, so you can read this all up and read all the research on this. But the last question, we've got the question whether the satellites. I can answer that question. And the next thing is the electric cars. That is another post-humanism thing. The more a self-driving car, what do you need it for the first place? The human being is made oblivious, and that is why they try to digitize the human being, because in the future they can have 2 millimeter nanometer chips, and injecting that in people. You can put that in drinks and in food. That's very easy to get it into the people. Best would be with an injection, but lots of other ways. Okay. However, I would be interested if there is good vibration, radiation that can be used in positive ways.
kurz darüber schon.
Yes, we have briefly touched on this.
Also erstmal
First, there is the so-called Schumann's wave. That's the geomagnetic field around 8 to 10 hertz. There is
auf den Menschen wirken. Wurde zum Beispiel
exams showing, observations showing that this is a positive effect on people done by Schumann himself, who did this research, and other professors. Quite a series of papers that prove the existence of that Schumann's wave, and we know this is the magnetic field of the Earth that affects the glandular,
wir sind also genetisch
and so it has an electromagnetic effect and a phylogenetic effect on the body. So we are connected to this wave. This is described in great detail here, and that is the scheme. So that must be
jetzt ist aber folgendes.
not obstructed, this system. However, it was shown
Weil
that
Magnetstürme sind.
if there are magnetic disruptions due to sun eruptions, that this system is interrupted and the people get sick. So there's 11 years and a couple of seconds. Sometimes it's 5 years. So these are quite regular, and that is what's quite provable. Sun eruptions are the means. I was outside of Berlin once, and I saw a polar light that was very rare. I've seen many in Finland, and the next days, I had over 20 patients calling in that they had sleepless nights. So that is by the disturbance of the geomagnetic field of the Earth can have that effect. And the next point is that these radiation waves disturb this field, and these are the correlations exist during evolution. The correlation between the geomagnetic field and our own magnetic fields, for example, of the heart, have developed, and if that relationship can be disturbed, that can be done by radio waves. And the infrared light of the sun is very important for us as well, and the electromagnetic radiation of the Earth's crust is seen very rarely. In many cases, it is friendly for the person, for the people. It may be too much. Some areas, the birch trees are all crippled, and maybe they are changed in some way. The Kazakh said that they have, it's in the Kazakh area where this magnetic field seems to be different, and the radiation, I don't know if there is any context here. So the radiation from the surface of the Earth plays a role. The sensitive people can feel this, and it can be measured as of today by technical devices as well. And the magnetic field mat is something that I have mentioned, and that is something that is helpful. If the negative radiation is hits us, this magnetic mat can put it back into order, and Professor Erluti recommends 20 minutes, maybe with 5G you need a little more, and you should get back. That is why there are frequencies, or this way there are frequencies that do help. 150 hertz. I don't know. Ludwig described it, and he's the founder of all of this. He worked with Madjetjev together. That 64 frequencies are included in this. They have individual frequencies that are in the crust of the Earth. And as I said, that was derived from the old Chinese, from the ancient Chinese knowledge. And that's it. So that is what I would have to say on this. We've talked about the silicium that protects us with infrared, which can protect us. We have an infrared cabin here. That's a solarium that we use, a red radiation. As we are not vaccinated, we can't go to a public sauna place at the moment. So that is what I had wanted to tell you today, and I could talk on for hours, of course. I can send you all the documents and all the papers that I have published and researched on. Well, thank you very much. Rainer, do you have any questions? No, I think it was very, very illustrating, Professor Hecht. It shows us that we, as the group of scientists and lawyers who can detach from the commercialized knowledge, science, which is no science anymore, we have to work together. We have to cooperate with the right people to really build up a new system. Yes, that is my attitude as well. This is why I didn't turn rich yet. I have a small pension to live on. I never thought about money. I always thought about the patients, or the health of the patients, rather. And that was in the foreground. In the first line, I looked at prevention, pathologic psychology. I wondered why we had to treat diseases. We had to create health, and that is what I worked with. Health has to be at the focus of our efforts. And the question is why and how can we stay healthy? That's the question that we have to ask in the context of Corona as well. Why do some people stay healthy, even though they are in contact with people who are sick of Corona? Well, they are excluded from life, and they can't participate. Well, it's our group. Okay. We are the ones who are creative. We are the ones who can invent things. We are the ones who simply don't follow the rules and the orders. Yeah, but you're right. We have to join up. We have to do more and more. And I have another article. I sent that to you, to your address, and we can do that. We can use it, put it all together, and I would have to have a couple of shows to show you all that I have researched in the course of my life. Yes, we would be happy to hear more from you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Hecht. It was a great honor and pleasure for us. Yes, it was a pleasure for me as well. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.